Okay, now it's recording. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. It's really good to have you here. Let me check. Oh, here he is. Just maybe 1 minute. So, in a few minutes, we're gonna start. Hello, Andreas, Valentina, welcome. We're gonna start with their case today. They are from Brazil. I'm gonna introduce them later. Before we go into that, we're gonna have a moment to check in pairs. So you're gonna have a chance to connect with someone, maybe someone new, someone you don't know, and just see what you need to share to become more present with us today. That's one of the purposes of a good check-in, is to bring yourself in and feel present with the group. And I will also give you a question for reflection, so you can reflect with your partner. And the question is, what have you been learning about the future we are creating? And how are you inspired to continue? So, welcome everyone. I see more people joining, so welcome again. I was just saying that in a minute, we are going to join a breakout room. Let me just multitasking. So the question is, what have you been learning about the future we are creating, and how are you inspired to continue? Some of you joined the first session, so maybe you were inspired or intrigued or confused by some of the things you heard. And that's a chance to reflect a little bit deeper in what you're learning. And if you're new to this, if today it's your first day, you're gonna have a chance to share what's bubbling right now for you when it comes to the future of work. So Sherry, if you will be so kind to send us to breakouts. Thank you.
Hello. We're the first ones back.
Mhm. You have a new chair, Jenna.
It's the chair that I was breastfed in. Can you believe it? My first nutrition I got here.
Wow. Wow. Welcome back, everyone. So now just for a minute, just if you can put it in the chat, something, a word or a phrase or a question that you heard in your breakout that caught your attention. Anything. Let's see.
We talked about emergent understandings.
Thank you. I heard something about interreligious collaboration. Holding the whole of it all. Inclusion. Intimate relationships can become work. The word work has many different meanings and contexts. Future of relationships. Midwife, the old way of doing things to the new way of living. Auspice, the old, midwife, the new. Yeah. Okay. All right. I don't want to get us late. So let's start with Sense Lab. I'm going to spotlight Valentina and Andreas. If you can raise your hand, Andreas, I can see you easy. Because I cannot find you. Here. I found you.
Did it work?
Yes, wait.
Yeah.
Spotlight. Yeah. So thank you for being here. I think I'm going to read briefly your description just to get us started. So Sense Lab is a B Corp that helps organizations and ecosystems to develop the leadership needed to face today's systemic challenges. Projects are implemented in Brazil and around the world for organizations from public, private, and social sectors. Sense Lab's way of working is based on the premise that one of the most powerful ways to create meaningful and sustainable change within a social system is to engage in dialogue, go through collective sense making, and create shared meaning with stakeholders. And I think the question we came up for this session is, how does multi-stakeholder dialogue impact ecosystems? And one thing I just found out today is that Andreas founded SenseLab in 2014. So they are celebrating 10 years of SenseLab. And I think I'll hand it over to you and you can share your story with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. So I'm gonna start. Maybe we can briefly introduce ourselves, Andreas, before we start the presentation. I'm Valentina. I am Brazilian, based in São Paulo. I have been working at SenseLab with organizational development and multi-actor arrangements for 4 years now, 4.5 years now. And what we want to discuss with you today is how can we use dialogue and dialogic approaches to work with organizations, to create interventions, to work with social systems.
Hello, Amanda. Thanks for the invitation. Hi, everyone. Very nice to be here with you and have this opportunity to exchange on such an interesting topic. I, as Amanda said, have been working at SenseLab for 10 years now. It's our 10-year anniversary this year. Trying to make sense of how we organize ourselves in organizations and enterprises and networks of organizations, and how we can make sense of what we're doing and repurpose the way we organize for our pressing challenges that we have as a global society. And we came up with this notion that one of the most powerful ways is to dive into conversation, because often we try to solve our challenges through mechanistic approaches and tend to think that everything is solved by linear engineering approaches, and we have been doing it a different way, which is creating time, as we said in our check-in, creating time to pause and reflect. And since our times are urgent, we need to pause and reflect. So we prepared this small presentation with a little bit of what we do, and then we want to reflect with you about organizations and about interventions in organizations and ecosystems, and then bring you one or two cases of what we have been doing. So I'll hand over to you, Valentina, to kick us off. Valentina, you're muted.
Sorry. So this is what we wanted to bring to the discussion today. So first, we want to talk a little bit about who we are and how the work that we're doing connects to the topic that we want to talk about today, which is how we understand organizations. So what are organizations? How do the internal dynamics in organizations work between people? And then from there, how we can create change in organizations, how we can design processes to create a new way of organizing, a new way of relating to one another. And then we also wanted to bring a practical application of this. So it's a project that we did with the global network of B-Lab to develop a theory of change, which was a global project involving people from all over the world. So a lot of complexity in designing this process through a dialogic approach to create a theory of change. So we wanted to tell you a little bit about that, and then if we have time, we might also go into the second case, which is about the seed network here in Brazil, which involves creating dialogue spaces with local communities, indigenous people. So it's also a kind of different perspective of how to create interventions in these systems through dialogic approaches. So starting with a little bit about us. So SenseLab is a purpose-driven B corporation. We develop dialogic processes for the development of organizations, leadership, and social systems that are engaged in building a regenerative and equitable economy and society. And we work in these three pillars. So the central one, which is the development of organizations, so designing interventions in organizations, and this could be for different purposes. So we do strategic planning. We also work with organizational design, designing structure, governance, also with organizational culture and so on. So we design processes for interventions through dialogue in organizations for different purposes. We also work with the catalyzation of networks and ecosystems. So interventions that involve many organizations, sometimes various sectors as well, and trying to usually to identify opportunities for collaboration. And we also work with individual development, so thinking about how we need to develop ourselves to be part of this transformation, to be working in organizations, networks, and ecosystems and sustaining these dialogue spaces that are important to create change. So this is a little bit about how we do it. We talked a little bit in the beginning, but we believe that the way we organize, the way we plan, the way we act needs to evolve, and that part of this transformation is engaging more in dialogue, in collaboration, involving different perspectives. So it's not only about the challenges that we see that we're facing in terms of climate change and social issues. It's also about the way we organize ourselves, the way we relate to one another. So we believe that we need to use dialogue to transform the way that we do things in order to create better outcomes for our society and for the planet. This is a little bit about our operating principles. We always say that how we do it is sometimes more important than what we do it. So we are at the service of those who transform. So we believe in the autonomy of the organizations that we work with to conduct their own development process, and we see ourselves as someone who is there to support them in these processes. We put people in the center, so we understand that organizations, networks are social systems, so people in the end relating to one another, engaging in dialogue and so on. So our focus is in supporting the people within these systems. We transform through inclusive dialogue, so we always try to include the different perspectives and different voices and create these spaces for conversation to happen and for people to be comfortable in them. We embrace complexity and we adapt. So we understand that when we are working with people, it's not always simple to understand what is going to happen in the whole process. So we need to be flexible. We need to be able to deal with what emerges and to adapt and adopt a dynamic approach. We also try to work in a cheerful way. So we also believe that this kind of processes should also be fun. So we try to, when possible, bring people out of their usual working environment, or at least to bring a different energy to the group, because we also believe that this changes the way people relate to one another. And this helps with the transformation that we're trying to do together. We seek coherence, so we try to be consistent and do in the inside what we are trying to do outside. So to also think about our own changes that we need to do. And we create maps of reality. So we understand that the core of the interventions that we do is the conversations themselves. So for example, if we have a strategic planning, it's only a tool for us to talk about what we want to achieve together and to create alignment. So the products that come out of these processes, they are not the main goal. The main goal is for us to be aligned, and we use them as a tool for conversation. And then here, just to reinforce this aspect of everything that we do externally, we do internally, or at least we try to, and how this helps us to stay adaptive and to be innovative. So we're always learning from our projects and other organizations that we're working in, and trying to reflect how this can impact our own way of organizing and relating to one another. And also always thinking about this aspect of changing the way organizations work and how we relate to one another is also some kind of impact. So it's not only about the impact in the end that we want to create for the planet, for the society. It's also about the impact in the people that we're working in, so the people that are close to us, the clients, and so on. And we're a process consultancy, so we can work with a wide area of thematic areas, because our focus is in designing these processes and interventions to help people talk to one another. But we understood over time that it made sense to focus on these two. So the first one is climate, forest, and social biodiversity, and the second one, socioeconomic transition and philanthropy. And as you can see here, we have been working with a lot of different sectors, so a lot of civil society organizations from the philanthropic sector, some companies as well. and so on, and also some international organizations. Since the pandemic, we have also been doing more and more international work. So I will now pass to Andreas for him to take us into the content and discussion about what organizations are.
Thanks, Valentina. Maybe I can share from here. So thanks for placing us on the map, Valentina. The idea here was for you all to have a sensation of what our place of speech is. But our actual topic here is exactly what we do, which is intervening in organizations and social systems through dialogue. And it might be useful to take a step back and reflect on what we mean by organizations and what organizations actually are. We did an exercise a couple of years ago internally by when we were reflecting about our practice, and this was exactly the question: what are organizations? And these are a few things that came out of the group. So organizations are networks of people. They are conversational dialogic processes. They are an entity with arbitrary boundaries. So we create organizations. We imagine organizations and start relating with one another based on social construct, which is an organization. It is a complex series that has a common. So these are wrong. I think I'll pause for a minute.
Andreas, can you hear us? I think you're breaking up a little bit. Are you back?
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this is not right or wrong. These are different answers that we got from trying to reflect on what the organizations actually are. And over time, I understand one of them, which so organization that must be acted. This is rooted in the understanding efficiency in organizations, and the focus here is on processes, on knowledge are evolved, and it evolved to a different perspective, which is a social perspective of organizations. So the perspective of organizations. So we see organizations as a group of humans that must be developed and motivated. And here on humans, on competencies, on necessities, on feelings, on motives. And this is rooted in psychology and human relations. It's kept evolving to a different notion, which is the social notion of where we organize social systems that self-organize. And this is from the two previous perspectives, in a sense that we're interested in patterns of human beings, and the other aspects, they are I wouldn't say secondary, but they are different, only facets of this communication patterns. I don't see anyone moving. I don't know if you can still hear me.
It was breaking up a little bit, but I think now it's better.
Okay, but was it okay to hear it?
Yeah, I think we could
Yeah.
follow.
Okay, so in this perspective of organizations, we see organizations, social systems as networks of conversation. So there are people creating narratives, exchanging dialogue, engaging in dialogue with one another, and this creates a reality in itself, which exists apart from the members of the community of the organization. And if you notice in this view of organizations, of course, it's composed by individuals, it's composed by people relating, but the construct that we create by dialogue, it exists apart from the individuals. So you can exchange people in a social system and it will still maintain more or less its culture, it will maintain its functions, it will maintain its narratives about itself. So in this perspective of organizations, we put the focus on the dialogic networks that's created and less on the mechanics and on the individuals that are in the organization. And the interesting thing when you start looking at this way, this is a funny image that we like to bring in, is we create a lot of images, notions, constructs to talk about organizations, organizational diagrams, and what actually happens in the organization happens on a different level than what's normally on the PowerPoint slides. You can have your departments, you can have your job descriptions, but the relations that happen in the background is actually what shapes the organizations. Some people are smiling, probably they're seeing something that they already saw in their work context, because it's a little exaggerated, but it's true. So this is an interesting aspect of social systems and organizations. We create meaning, and we create meaning through engaging in dialogue. And we create our own reality, which is apart from the actual reality. We don't access the reality, we create our own image of the reality. And this is important for us to reflect on the next topic in a minute, which is how can we intervene on an organization if we understand it the way I am describing. So one important aspect of this is that in an organization or in a social system, we have people interacting through dialogue. This dialogue, it generates emerging patterns of the system, which are common patterns of the whole system, which by its way influences the way that individuals behave. So it's a reinforcing pattern that, of course, if you get a new job, you get into an organization, what you do will influence the pattern in the organization, but you are shaped by the pattern of this organization as well. So you will start to behave in a way that the social construct expects you to behave, probably. And another aspect of this is that since organizations and social systems, they are meaning-generating entities, they self-generate. There is a concept in biology, probably most of you or many of you know Maturana, but which is autopoiesis. Autopoiesis is a concept from biology that tries to explain what's different in life, in the biological phenomena of life. And one of the aspects of the biological phenomena of life is that it self-creates. We self-create ourselves. Our biological processes create our self-sustenance. And the same happens in social constructs in organizations. So the organization, by engaging in dialogue, creates its own reality and creates itself, creates its boundaries. And one last aspect of talking about organizations before we talk about interventions is, so what defines an organization? One way, Luhmann, a German social scientist, defines organization by these three aspects. So an organization has a function or a purpose. It is about people relating and engaging in dialogue around a common purpose. It can be to create a product, it can be to create a service, it can be to solve a social problem if it is a non-for-profit. It is marked by membership. So you are in or out, you are an employee or not an employee, you are a voluntary member of the NGO or not. And it has hierarchy. Not necessarily hierarchy as a pyramid as we know it, but hierarchy in the sense that decisions are made somewhere and there are processes to make decisions and direct the organization. So this was a little bit about what we understand or one way of understanding organizations to kick us off. And this is important for us to talk about how we deal with that when we are called to intervene in organizations. So if we want to create change in organizations, if we want people to be more aligned and have a new strategy, if we want to interfere in the culture because something negative is emerging in these common patterns, or if we want to design a new organizational structure, seeing the organization as something mechanistic leads you to radically different interventions than seeing it as patterns of conversation. And we tend to see it as patterns of conversation. And this leads us to two different ways of approaching organizational development. The classic school of organizational development might be called diagnostic organizational development, and it contrasts to a school that is more related to what we just discussed in the past few minutes, which is dialogic organizational development. And they are radically different in the way they see interventions in organization. In diagnostic organizational development, we look at organizations as living systems to be modified through the understanding of objective facts and proposing a new ideal state. So you diagnose, you say the organization is this way, it's not functioning because of that and that and that. And we want to pause it, design a new structure or a new way of operating, and then unfreeze it and start operating in the new way. The dialogic school of organizational development says that organizations are dialogic systems, which are composed of individual interactions. And the way of intervening this is engaging in dialogue and intervening or together with the subjects of the organization, finding new ways of make meaning of reality. So the dialogue is the scope of the intervention. And by trying to reflect on the reality in a different way, we are creating change. We don't understand, freeze, redesign and unfreeze. We go through a continuous process of reviewing the language and the narrative and the stories and the way that we perceive reality in the organization. I'm skipping a few slides here for time's sake. Maybe just this one. What Valentina said, we see ourselves as a process consultancy, which is different than specialist consultancy in the way that interventions, they are meant to create enabling spaces within the organization for people to realize things by themselves. So this combined with the dialogic approach means that we don't have the knowledge, we are not a specialist, we are not going to solve things for the organization, but we are creating an intervention or a process that is a facilitated process to intervene in the ongoing dynamics in an organization and help the organization to achieve their agreed objectives, the agreed objectives of the intervention process. So if you see it this way, it's not an outside hero that's coming to solve your problem. It's about someone who is helping to create dialogic spaces for the organization to reflect on its own practices, to align on where the organization wants to go, and then create the rituals and the processes and the dialogic spaces to move forward. And this in practice for us works more or less in this way. It speaks a lot to the principles that Valentina brought. We create dialogue, so we interview people, we host workshops, we visualize what is coming out of this dialogic processes. And this visualization, it creates languages for the organization to change and feed back into the dialogic process. So it's a living way of creating conversation, seeing what emerges from the conversation, changing the organization, feeding it back to the dialogic process. And it also goes back to another principle Valentina brought up in the beginning of the presentation, which is a continuous flow of, this is a model that was developed by Glenda Young, which talks about adaptive system, and is a continuous flow of gathering information, gathering narrative stories about your social system, about your organization, sitting together to reflect on what this actually means. So again, if you are an external intervener, you are not there to tell which way to go. You're there to collect stories, collect information, bring them out in the open, and invite the group to reflect on this information, and then together agree on actions to be executed based on this reflection. And then again, collect information, make sense of it, and move forward. And this often is a chaotic process. Maybe some of you know this model. It's widespread in innovation processes, but also in dialogic processes. If you engage in conversations, you are not reaching conclusions very fast. You often are first diverging because people have different perspectives. And this often creates a chaotic atmosphere where you have different perspectives in the room, people are disagreeing. And it's important in a dialogic processes to sustain this chaos and enable space for emergence, and enable space for people to mature what's out there before you make choices and converge to a new state, to a new organizational structure, to a new strategy, and so on. So this was a little bit of how we see organizations and how we see interventions in organizations, and Valentina can tell you a little bit of how it might be applied in practice.
Andreas, Amanda asked us to go directly to the Xingu case because probably we won't have time for both. So maybe you can go on.
I would go to this case, not instead of
This one?
Xingu.
Okay. Is it okay, Amanda?
Yes.
Okay.
I maybe we can also hear both. Yeah, would be
Okay.
great.
Let's see how we are in time.
So you want to go, Valentina?
Yeah, let me share the screen again. So this project is something that we did together with the B-Lab Global Network. I don't know if all of you know them, but they are responsible for the B Corp certification, and they are a global movement. So they have global coordination, but they also have a very distributed structure with people from all around the world. So B-Lab is a network of organizations building this movement to change the economic system towards a more equitable and regenerative economy. And this brings a little bit about this perspective of the complexity of the network and of creating these interventions through dialogue with all of this complexity. So in the center, we have the global leadership team, which is the core decision-making group, which is made out of representatives from the different regions. So we have a representative from B-Lab US and Canada, from B-Lab UK, from B-Lab Europe, and so on. And we also have the team from B-Lab Global, which support the coordination of all of these entities. And then for some of them, we also have another layer, which is the country, what they call country partners. So for example, for B-Lab Europe, they have B-Lab Germany, B-Lab Italy, B-Lab France, and so on. The same for the Asian countries. And at the time that we did this project in Asia, it was even more challenging because they didn't have coordination of something like B-Lab Asia. It was just a bunch of emerging new country partners. So the same for Sistema B, which is Latin America, Africa, and so on. So a lot of complexity here in the structure of the network and its governance. And the calling, so what we were doing together with them is to build the theory of change for the global network. So they were feeling that they were missing out on using the power of the global network because they were not coordinated enough. So they were not aligned enough in the change that they wanted to promote and the strategies that they were going to use to get there. So at least part of the group that asked for this process wanted to build a process to engage all of the people that were part of the network to create a common direction in which they wanted to go together and to have more coordinated efforts to be able to take advantage of the power of the global network. So we designed together a theory of change for the global network to organize the organization strategies, understand the results that they wanted to achieve that would lead them to that vision of transforming the economic system. And it would also be an important communication tool for them to be able to use with various stakeholders. And it was clear from the beginning that it should be something that is built collaboratively and including the different perspectives of the many players that were part of the global network. I will skip this maybe. And then the main challenge here is the balance between this distributed leadership, so respecting the autonomy of the local players, the country partners, and their own structures, governance, and decision-making processes, and balance this with building global coherence to somehow find the strength in the global movement and create a common vision between all of them. Then at the time, we're doing very different things because they lacked this global alignment. So we're at the whole time during the process trying to respect the autonomy and give freedom to innovation in the local part, but at the same time trying to build coherence in the global level. And this is just some numbers to reflect the complexity of the project. So there were 45 countries involved. We talked with over 50 country representatives in interviews to get their perspectives about the strategy and where they thought the network should move towards. Then we also had around 90 virtual workshops with people from all over the world, coordinating time zones and so on. And we also worked on 22 preliminary versions of the theory of change before we reached one that was good enough for everybody that was part of the process. So this was really challenging. And I think one lesson from this is that sometimes when you have a very complex structure and you want to create an intervention based on dialogic approaches, it takes more time and it takes more energy and you have to be patient. So it's important to consider that, like, it brings a lot of benefit, but it's also challenging in many other aspects. So this needs to be considered as well. And this is just to show the outcome of this whole process. So we aligned on the problem that they wanted to solve as a global network, the stakeholders that were more relevant for their strategy. Then we aligned on 5 global strategies that were broad enough so that they could have freedom to innovate at the local level, but that brought some alignment and coordination at the global level. And then we created together also the 2 levels of outcomes of what they wanted to achieve together. That afterwards was unfolded into strategic planning that was also globally created and then brought back to the regional and local levels. So this is like the final image of it, and it should be broad enough that it's that it doesn't constrain too much the freedom of the network. But I think it's an outcome that helped them to create this common narrative about what they wanted to achieve and how they were going to do it together. I don't know if we have time for the last case.
I would maybe go to questions. Amanda, I don't know how we are with time.
I would love to hear a little bit about the case of Xingu, just because it's more Brazilian, I guess, and I was I was curious. Yeah.
Okay, we can do it. You are the timekeeper.
In 3 minutes, maybe, if you can just
I'll
share
go.
the nuggets, the essential learnings.
Okay, let me show the screen here, maybe, Valentina.
Okay.
Maybe while I share the screen, just to connect what Valentina just shared with what we were saying before. For us, the success indicator for the work that we were doing with this whole complex global network is not an image or a manual or a book that came out of it. If you view the organizations and social systems in a different way, your success indicator also changes. For us, it was more interesting to see if this language was being used by people, and if they were seeing themselves in the strategies, when they needed alignment, they were speaking this language, then having a nice image, a nice strategy, a nice theory of change. And it's also a warning signal when you're doing this kind of things, because if you're doing an intervention and you're creating an amazing strategy, but no one's speaking about it and no one is using this language, you are doing it wrong, because it's not meaningful for the people it should be meaningful for. And this goes back to what we were saying, like, it's only a tool, it's only a language to engage in conversation. It's not the outcome. The outcome is changing the dialogue. It's changing the way people relate and speak about their organization. And this often in traditional consulting gets done wrong, because you create amazing PowerPoints, but no one is reflected in the PowerPoints and no one is using it because it doesn't make sense for anyone. I'll be quick here, Amanda. So this is a similar approach. This is about the Xingu Seed Network. We did it in 2019. And to be quick about the context is everyone knows we are losing forest coverage very quick around the globe, and especially in Brazil. And in order for us to reach climate targets, we need to restore forest. It's not enough to stop deforestation. It's not enough to capture carbon in other ways. It's not enough to stop emitting. We need to capture carbon in a way of forest. And to restore forest, you need seeds. So you need to have seeds to plant the forest back. In order to restore Amazon rainforest, you need 270 species of seeds. And the seeds have to come from somewhere. You don't buy them in the supermarket. And in order to get the seeds from somewhere, you need to go close to the people that are close to the seeds. And these people normally are indigenous people, small farmers, some people in cities, but depending on the species. And to organize a network to collect the seeds, to gather them, and to get the right mix, and then bring them to where it's needed to restore forest, in farming lands or in conservation units that are deforested, is an art in itself. And to getting all these people aligned with the same image and operating together is something on top of the art of doing the operational part. So it was created in 2017. It had 570 seed collectors from 27 different nuclei communities, representing, as I said, different populations. So many indigenous people, many small farmers, some city dwellers, speaking very different languages. Literally, like some of them don't speak the same language, but having very different perspectives about the world and why they are doing what they are doing. And the origin of this network was an indigenous territory was created in Brazil, which is the Xingu territory, this one. And the spring of the rivers, they were kept outside the territory. And the water quality inside the indigenous territory was deteriorating, and it started, so we have to restore the forest outside the indigenous territory. And they organized in a seed network, which more or less is a very rough representation. So you have the association of collectors, you have the 27 nuclei, which are collecting seeds, and this has to go somewhere to a customer or someone who is implementing restoration. And all of this is in service of the communities. So the governance is, the overarching governance body is composed by indigenous people, by farmers, so there's no external authority managing this whole network. And our challenge was, with a mandate of the UK government, which was investing in the strength of this network, was to create a participatory business plan for this network. So how can the indigenous people, the small farmers, everyone who's involved, tell us what their priorities are and what they need in order to strengthen the network, and where the money they are going to receive was going. And the challenge here is, if you ask an indigenous people, how do you want to strengthen your organization? The first question is, what is an organization? Because they don't speak, this is our construct, our social construct. They don't use this kind of language and notion of organizing the world. So here as well, we had like exploratory processes in terms of going to the field, talking to indigenous people, interviewing people in a completely different dynamics than for B-Lab, for example. Interviewing a small farmer, you go there and you spend the afternoon drinking coffee with them and talking to them and understanding their context. And then we brought all of this to workshops, mixing all these people, first in mapping preliminary levers for the network, and then validating them with all these people, and then creating a business plan. And this business plan, this was 2019. Over the following 2 or 3 years, the initiative invested in it, actually. So this was amazing to look at actually happening. So infrastructure being built, marketing plan appearing, investment in financial organization internally. So this is roughly what it was very quickly, Amanda. And maybe for us to close, I like this quote here. So if you don't find prepared people, you will have to prepare them. If you don't find transformed companies, you should transform them. Some say this is utopia, and maybe it is. For me, utopia is the horizon to which we must move. So keep
Thank
dreaming
you.
to move on.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I will ask everyone if you have questions to them. You can place it in the chat, and maybe, or maybe if you are open to share your email address or the contact of SenseLab, so if someone is really interested in your work, they can reach out and ask. because I think we're going to have to move on to the next case and skip the questions here. Is that okay? Yeah. Thank you so much. Let me remove spotlight. Thank you. And did I manage to? Oh, okay. So we're also gonna skip break. If you need to make a break, feel free to make a break. And I'm going to invite Karen. Is she here? Hello.
Hey, Amanda.
I'm
Hey,
sorry for
everyone.
the little delay.
That's no problem, not at all. It's a pleasure to be listening.
And I'm gonna spotlight myself just because I will be interviewing Karen now. Okay, let me just take a breath. There was a lot of new information for me. And I love the idea of working with seeds. So, Karen, welcome.
Thank you.
Just quickly, would you mind introducing yourself to us?
Absolutely. Of
Yeah.
course. My name is Karen Downs. I'm Australian by birth, and I've been living in the UK for the last 22 years. And my background actually began in the 90s as a healer, and I trained in multiple disciplines of alternative health. And the one that became most important to me from both my spiritual studies of anthroposophy and Rudolf Steiner's work, from the spiritual interpretation and understanding of plants, and also my training, aromatherapy became the passion I had. So I started an aromatherapy company, literally sourcing essential oils from all over the world from farmers who were growing organically or were committed to the environment and using regenerative practices, and developed a company based on essential oils, teaching both therapists. We had an aromatherapy college that was an international college, and we also had a mantra with our product, which was returning healing to the healers, which was the women. So taking and able to interpret or introduce a new way of medicine from the allopathic approach to medicine, which is finding looking at a symptom and providing a solution to the problem or the symptom, versus going to the source of the system and using natural medicaments and essential oils to heal. Over the course of the 13 years of my developing that business, we exported our training programs and our product to 5 countries, and had registered our products with 1,500 pharmacies in drug rehabilitation clinics, in hospitals of palliative care. So it was an amazing journey of 13 years. And we also introduced and lobbied the government for, in the Therapeutic Goods Administration, which in the States is the same as the FDA. The FDA is the American governing body, and in Australia it's the FDA, the TGA, and we managed to get essential oils registered as therapeutic substances for healing and medicinal purposes. So that was the basis of my my work, and what we're talking about today is the feminine. So building that business on feminine principles. And if I fast forward, moving to England in 2001, I started working in leadership development based on my entrepreneurial experience of building a business from startup to a multi-million-dollar business. And I started working in transformational leadership, studied with Joanna Macy, and started working in systems change, understanding deep systems theory, and bringing that into organizations in oil and gas and mining. So I went from oils out of plants to oils out of the ground. And I had for 13 years the experience of working with all women, and then 7 years of working with all men in some of the most toxic environments. So those parallels for me gave me the insight into creating and co-founding FemQ, which was when I looked into the world and the work I was doing in corporations, what I saw was profoundly missing was the feminine. and the feminine, whether it was in a boardroom or an executive team, being not just women, but the feminine principle, where the masculine tendencies, qualities, and strengths were valorized and became the common practice, and the deep feminine qualities of compassion, intuition, nurturance, mercy, devotion, all of the softer qualities of our humanity were not allowed, not permissible in a boardroom or in ways of leadership. So I created with colleagues and launched in 2016 FemQ. And I know this is a long introduction. It's probably just getting us into the conversation as well of why feminine intelligence, Amanda, if that's okay. There's one more piece to add. In terms of systems change, I think my first experience was working with women with my inner aromatherapy and seeing how the notion of having agency over one's own body and being responsible and accountable for the health and well-being of the family empowered women to say that they could be the healers. They didn't need a doctor to actually administer drugs, but they could look at what was happening in the system of their family, in the constellation of their family and their own system to heal. And I also worked at that time in India and Bangladesh for the Hunger Project as an activist. So I paralleled my business leadership alongside my activism. And what I loved about the Hunger Project mostly was the experience or the understanding that hunger, the chronic persistence of hunger, had nothing to do with food. So famine is when people need food. The chronic persistence of hunger is a systemic norm that's perpetuated in often developing countries. And the cause, during the research that we did, the cause of the chronic persistence of hunger was the subjugation and marginalization of women. When women were empowered, when they had a vision for their future, when they could make a stand in their agency and sovereignty over their own bodies and contribute to community, the community flourished. And I now say if the feminine's not present and we're not respecting and honoring the feminine, we will surely perish. That's a big statement, but that's my experience of working across these many different countries, geographies, and sectors.
Thank you.
Long introduction, but I think it gets us into
That's
the
helpful.
conversation.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. I also I think I want to go straight to the main question I have for you, which is, could you share cases or stories, examples of systemic and cultural change brought about through applying feminine intelligence? So maybe one or two examples of changes that you saw happening because you, or maybe with your consultants work, or I don't know how, but like, yeah, real changes that you saw and you attribute to this feminine intelligence.
I guess I would say the changes that I experienced and observed is one thing, but also the resistance to the changes, which is something more recent that I've come to understand and see. Because when I speak about the feminine and FemQ, and I say that all genders have access to the feminine, but it's been subjugated and marginalized, denied in many of us in terms of an expression in an organization or even in our lives often. And one of the things I've discovered recently, and seeing that every time we run a FemQ summit, which we're doing in Strasbourg in France this year, yet again, it's our seventh international summit, is that when we promote FemQ, women show up. And when I say the feminine exists in all genders, the constraint I start to observe is that men deny it, or have told they shouldn't exhibit feminine traits or qualities, what we've traditionally called feminine qualities, the softer part of ourselves. I think it's a challenge that we all have in terms of the system has been, our system, societal and planetary systems have been dominated by the over-valorized masculine qualities by both women and men and all genders. So I think I want to say that there's a constraint, but the shift, and the statistic is by the UN, is that it's going to take over 135 years to reach gender equality and parity, which is 5 generations. And I think systemically, in part, it's to do with men not having been told to grow up and grow some, or to exhibit these particular qualities in organizations that are acknowledged, and it becomes a hierarchical system of only recognizing certain qualities that make the difference or are validated for performance. So that's one thing, is the constraint on the feminine. But coming back to your question, more importantly, I think what I witnessed in creating a business where I had no business acumen, it was literally by my intuition that I created the aromatherapy company back in Australia. And what I noticed is, following my intuition, which was experiencing in my own body and my own family system, that the masculine, my father, dominated the system. But when I came to start my own business, I became the person that had a voice, that wanted to embody the feminine and encourage women to, because that was our main audience and client, and encourage women to return to that natural tendency of healing. And that's what we did in the company. So my company was built on feminine principles. And one of the things that I would say is, it was important to hear Andreas and Valentina speak, because they used the word ritual. And every morning we would start with rituals of meditation. We would start with rituals of lighting our oil vaporizers, honoring the space, the environment in which we worked, setting the stage for being and optimizing our potential and our strengths. And we would have meetings to gather and align every morning on our purpose and the difference that we wanted to make. So there were principles that we started and built the business on. And because I had no business experience, in fact, I didn't even finish high school, and had no business experience, I would say I was operating totally from the feminine. So my feeling for, my sensitivity to people's, having empathy and compassion for people's personal circumstances, and including those in the business versus denying them, inviting people to bring their heart to business and express themselves fully as their whole person. And we would do personal development training for all of our staff. So it was very reflective. We developed dialogue and communication in building our business that was very much co-created. People got to contribute their strengths. And we also worked on our shadow sides of the feminine, of where we had become shaped by our families, where the dominance was the masculine and men, and how we intervened in, when we approached all of our clients, all of our customers, it was always through the feminine principle, sitting down, building relationship, sharing our values, having them aligned with others. So all of our customers were like family. All of our customers became very much part of our network. And it wasn't like a supply chain where we delivered a product. We engaged them in operating from these rituals. We encouraged the pharmacies that we worked with. We trained all of their staff in these principles. So we had, at one point, I would say probably 1,800 members of our community in stores all over Australia, speaking from nurturance, nourishment, self-care, healing. And it was extraordinary, the difference that made in business, in people's businesses and in their personal lives, because there was no separation. And that was what was most important, no separation between our personal lives and our business life. We were whole and complete wherever we showed up.
Thank you. There's also one more question I want to ask, and then maybe we can open to the group. I think one of the most attracting things about what I read about your work and also the description you sent me was the potential difference that women can make in what we're calling the decision-making tables.
Mhm.
So when we have more women in the roles of decision making in leadership positions, in your experience, could you tell us a little bit of what you have seen over the years? I mean, you just shared your own story, and that's a beautiful example. But I'm also curious about the nuances there of not just like being in dialogue, men and women being in dialogue, and being together in a table making decisions. So yeah, what's your yeah?
I think the one of the biggest things I see, Amanda, and I work with women and run retreats on women's leadership. One of the biggest things that I see is that many, and I don't want to just point to women, but it's predominant in the corporate environment, where dialogue is not revered or seen as a strength. It's so hierarchical. And I think the ability to be able to penetrate a conversation or intervene in a conversation that's going in a particular direction versus being triggered and stepping back from the conversation and saying, I don't belong here. I hear this a lot now from women. I want to move out of corporate. It doesn't serve me. I don't have shared values. And I think one of the challenges for us is if we're going to shape the future, if we're going to change the system, that change has to come from the inner agency and feeling of trust in ourselves and what we bring and who we are. So I think there's a lot in language and dialogue, and it's already been said in the previous conversations, that I think lacks precision, I'd have to say. There's not a sufficient language at the moment to embrace the feminine, because the default mode network, our habitual way of operating in our in our nervous system and our neural pathways, is so strong and habituated toward listening to the men. And I even asked a colleague recently that I had a theory that perhaps even the tone of a woman's voice cannot be heard in a business meeting because it's a different pitch. And we're always listening for the vibrational energy of the tone or the words that are spoken. And she said, you're actually right. I'm an opera singer and I've trained my voice to be in baritone so I can be heard. Now, I'm not suggesting for a second everyone needs to change the tone of their voice, but it's that complex. I was just speaking to my team this morning from FemQ and saying that we have to be mindful that we are often unconsciously diverting or deflecting or defaulting to the masculine in ourselves that we've developed and been shaped by. And that's why I love this conversation we're in. And what you're doing, Amanda, is because you're developing a very different nuance to storytelling, to dialogue, to presencing. And I think to being able, women and men, all genders, being able to notice when these softer qualities and these more relational aspects of how we work and who we are must come into how we're working, because how we're working isn't working. And the burnout and the conversations I hear of so many women and the terms that many are using now, toxic masculine, gender inequality, diversity and inclusion agendas. And I often say that shifting the quotas won't shift the mindset. So just because you have more diversity at the table, it doesn't mean the mindset and the transformation has happened internally. So I think there's a lot of work, but we need to do it together. I see so many women's organizations, and that's why I created FemQ, because it's not about women, but women who have developed the more developed both the masculine and the feminine energies in a holistic whole way, can bring something with strength and with softness and with healing and with compassion. And so I think my interest these days is developing and acknowledging the feminine that is in all of us, and how men might be interested in developing those qualities and what impact that might have on the systemic change in an organization and the future of work.
Yeah, I'm nodding because I'm remembering of my experiences working inside an organization, and the fear I would feel to make a point in a meeting, and how many times I just didn't speak what I was thinking. And even sometimes I was the person behind that product I was developing and doing the research. And when we were with the client in the meeting, my boss was speaking for me, and I couldn't. I just so I think we can maybe everyone has a different experience with this, depending where they are, the culture and their level of development. But I just remember struggling a lot, and so
I would
thank
love
you.
to. I would love to share another example to your point, Amanda, building on what you said. Is I'm here in Costa Rica at the moment, and I was working in a project when I was living here 2 years ago on the ground regeneration project, and I was working with a team of leaders. The colleague I was co-leading the program with said to me, "You have to lead all of it." And I said, no, we're co-leading. He said, "No, they will revert to me every time as the voice of authority in the room." He was so conscious of the impact of his white, middle-aged physical form and educated as a professor. So when I say proudly, I didn't finish high school and I built a multi-million-dollar business, not because of the millions, but because of what it took me to build that business acumen and my own transformation in who I had to be. But he recognized profoundly the impact of him being 6'2", him being white, him being middle-aged, having the title of professor, and the impact that that would have on the executive team that we were working with. So I think that the awareness of the masculine that is so dominant, we have a world that's been designed by men for men, and now it's shifting. Over the years, it's shifted. And I think now we have to work together even more profoundly and really acknowledge, when we look into Mother Nature, which is feminine, she is feminine. She works in seasons and cycles and flow and all of these messages we get from nature. But how do we embody that? Not say it's valuable and point to it, but know that we are all of that, and start to do that inner work that's so essential for our acknowledgement to be whole and complete. And I know that many men I speak to, and I say, if you're in business in an organization, especially in these big global Fortune 500 companies that I've worked in, and I say to the men, if for 12 hours a day, you are only using the left hemisphere of the brain in logic and rationale and strategic endeavors, 12 hours a day, that's a muscle you build, like going to the gym. What happens when you go home and now is the time to be intimate and relational with your children and your partner? How does that go? 12 hours building a muscle and 2 hours release. It's not a good combination. And so why I love the idea of reimagining work, Amanda, and what you're doing is the notion of pulsing through the day. This is what we did in my company. And I teach people about ritual, about how do we pulse during the day so that we don't have back-to-back 60-minute Zoom meetings. We have no pause. The organizations I work in eat lunch at their desk. And so one other example I'd love to give you is I worked for a year with Virgin Atlantic, and they asked me, my consulting business is the Flourish Initiative. and I teach about human flourishing. And they asked me to do a 2-day workshop for 1,600 of their leaders. And I say thriving for me has a more masculine energy, because it's much more, thriving is a more pushing out. Flourishing has the seasons. And so we were teaching how to flourish in the business, and they would have business rituals where they would pause, they would have practices that they would institute. And I would say that what we were bringing, my team and I were bringing, was the feminine. And it was the first time I've ever heard where people said, I can't believe the organization has brought you in. It's the first time that I feel my leadership is as much about me personally as it is about me professionally. So I think this notion of flourishing and how we reimagine the future of work, it has to be about human flourishing, because people are burnt out and worn out, and they're told not to bring their hearts to the office. And this is what's producing such despair and devastation, not only to personal, but also our planet.
Thank you, Karen. I would love to welcome one question from the group, if anyone has the guts. And if no one has a question, we will have. Oh, okay. You can speak, Velin.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Beautiful.
Trying to find-
I'm probably not on camera, but hopefully there's a picture there. But thank you so much. This has been a really engaging and nourishing talk. Something that was coming to mind, particularly as you were speaking about your partner for, I think it was a nonprofit project you mentioned, and how he was so aware of his own presence. He was so conscious and aware that authority would divert back to him. And so my question is, we think about allowing the feminine to arise within men as well, allowing feminine aspects and attributes to be prioritized. But I wonder, how do you get men to a point where they feel comfortable allowing themselves to do that? And how do you invite them to embrace those aspects of themselves without putting them on the defense? Because I think in so many conversations about diversity and so many conversations where we are talking about bringing different voices to the table, a lot of particularly like white men in positions of power start to get really nervous, and they get in a position of defense, and then there's no transformation happening once somebody's in a position of defense. And so I hope that question is clear, but like, how do we allow people to develop self-awareness to a point where they actually want to lean on their feminine attributes and not just learn about it from a position of defense?
Great question, thank you. What I've noticed in my evolution of these years of whether it was my company, the Hunger Project, working with FemQ, and in these very male-dominant environments, is every time I speak about the feminine, my dialogue changes. So I'm always present to what's being said versus, and disciplining myself not to carry as best I can a backload of the toxicity or these terms that we now use, toxic masculine, gaslighting, patriarchy. And I actually ask my team not to use the word empowerment, empowering women anymore. And why I do that is because it suggests more of the patriarchy to me. I can't empower anyone. Everyone has potential and power. What my job is to unlock and release the constraints that are prohibiting the potential and power to be released. So to your point, Amanda, when you said you felt fearful and the man took over and spoke on your behalf, that is a constraint to your potential being exhibited and your full self-expression being allowed in the organisation through lack of self-awareness or on perhaps his part. But I think these terms that we use, to your point, Vivian, is it's critical that we understand what's happening in the system without using these big abstract terms like patriarchy. Oh, it's the patriarchy. And I say to people, what do you mean by that? What's your as lived experience that you're referring to? What do you feel in your system? What do you notice in your body? Oh, my system gets agitated and I feel triggered. Okay, what's that triggering? It feels like humiliation, that I've lost, someone's taken my self-worth. So drilling down into these terms versus projecting on men that it's the patriarchy. And I was just with a group this week for an eight-day retreat here in Costa Rica, 26 women and 3 men. And all of the men by the end of the week felt total shame. And the women said, I get it, we've been male bashing all week. And these were highly trained therapists. And so this notion that exists inside of all of us, that we project on men, it's their fault, they've done the damage. It's all about the white middle-aged men. Now, I know I mentioned my colleague as a white middle-aged man, but these stereotypes that we now associate to toxicity, to the damage that's been done on the planet, if we're going to tell a new story, we have to embrace the wholeness, recognize how we've been shaped, what we've been shaped by. And on International Women's Day, I deliberately had an all-male panel this year, and I asked 3 different men. One was in his 70s, from a movie director in LA, a dear friend of mine, a man here in Costa Rica who works in regeneration in his 50s, and a young man who's a social entrepreneur who's 28. And I asked the 3 of them from these different geographies and different age brackets, what was the message that you got as a young man, a young boy, about the feminine and women? Why is it that you see men resist this word of the feminine? And the answers were phenomenal, that how they'd been shaped, what they saw, why they think it's being resisted by men, why every single summit we have 95% of the participants are women. And I never say it's for women. I always say it's about the feminine. So there is something that is, Velin, to your question, there is something that's, and maybe the men can respond to it here, there is something that has been pervasive, I believe, in our system, in our societal and structures and systems, that has not enabled men to express emotions, to be intimate with each other and with others. All of these aspects of women gathering in circles and sharing their stories, all of the things that have been deeply feminine for centuries, and the men being warriors and having to look at who we send to war and look who is devastated by the war. It's the men that go to war, and it's the women and the children that are often the most impacted. Same with climate change, and that's really our focus in FemQ, is we focus on climate and ecology, peace building and gender justice for all, and right livelihood. It's the focus of our work and the focus of our summit. So I think that we're penetrating something, we're intervening in something, and even if I use the word penetration, we're intervening in something that has governed our lives, and it's going to take something, our level of consciousness, our partnership, our alliances, our collaborations, our whole person, to intervene in what has diminished us.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you for the question. I will invite now a pause, and we will return here again to the dialogue session with Glenna and the group. And I'm sure everything that's in the air now will have a place to land in our dialogue. So I'll see you in 5 minutes.
Thanks, Amanda.
I'm actually going to go to my gallery view. Well, Amanda, yeah, that's great. So everybody, hello. My name's Glenna Gerard. I'm seeing a lot of names in black boxes. So if you're back with us and if you're comfortable, if you would turn on your video, it helps in terms of just the presence of our overall collective in the field. And it also helps me kind of know whether people are here to get us started. So thank you. I'm seeing your wonderful faces coming on the screen. Don't worry if you're munching or needing to have a drink or whatever else you're doing. That's fine. Okay, I'm going to wait one more minute until 12:40 on my clock. I don't know what it is where you are. Hey, Maria Andrea, I see you've got, is that a daughter you've got with you? Maria Andrea and I were actually together in a pair at the very beginning. All right. So I want to just welcome you to our session and just say very briefly kind of what the flow is going to be here. In a minute, I'm going to start by offering just a grounding and presencing exercise for all of us. And then I'm going to talk to you just a little bit about what the intention is of the session, a very brief introduction around dialogue itself as we are going to be practicing and in some sense kind of demoing it for you. And then I'm going to have Amanda spotlight my partners in this exploration, and we're going to move into a dialogue for somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes. And we're going to ask you to witness us, but also to be practicing some very specific skills. I know you probably read the description. Then we will close that short dialogue and we'll come out and we'll reflect together on what you witnessed, some of your thoughts, and we'll call that our session. So that's what we're up to. So right now, I'd like to go ahead and just move into this grounding exercise. So I'd like for you to just get comfortable wherever you happen to be. You know, you might feel your feet on the ground, or if you're not, you know, or maybe also feel your sits bones, you know, your butt or your ass, those bones back there on your seat. Just kind of feel yourself. Where you're making contact with the ground or with your chair. Even if you're like 3 stories above the actual earth, right? Feel your feet down there. Okay. And then I'd like for you to just notice the breath in your body. Just notice how your body is breathing. In some sense, our bodies breathe us. So just allow that awareness. And just notice what it feels like just to be here now. Take a few breaths in and out, and let your exhales be long and slow. Just notice what it feels like as you're arriving and finding yourself, slowing down. Or do you already feel settled in? What's going on with you? Just take some time to check in with yourself. You know, be present to whatever's there. No judgment, just whatever is present with you. And what sensations do you notice in your body? Your heart beating, or your hands tingling, your stomach making noises? What emotions might be present? Are you curious, tired, happy, unhappy? Are you ready? What's your mood? And how do you know what your mood is? And again, just allow yourself to be present with yourself. Again, feel your feet on the ground, where you're making contact with your chair. And as we close this brief reflection and grounding, just take a moment to notice the earth beneath you, even if it is a few floors down. And notice gravity holding you. Let yourself feel the support that's there for you. And now at your own pace, begin to transition. Wiggle your toes a little. Stretch. Move in any way that your body calls for. And just slowly open your eyes if you have them closed. Notice any shifts that you're experiencing in your body, mind, spirit, from before we started until now. And then, just at your own pace, I'd like for you to bring your attention back to this room, to the Zoom room. And I'd like for you to shift your focus and greet the others in this space. If you have your camera off and you can turn it on, please do. It's a little easier to greet people that have their camera on. But whatever way you have of just greeting, you've been witnessing and greeting yourself. So now go ahead and turn your attention to this group and allow yourself to reach out and connect with a few people. And if people are not comfortable with their, cameras on, go ahead and reach out anyway. They're there. There's somebody behind that name in that box. And just imagine connecting, creating kind of a thread of connection to that person. Feel yourself weaving a web of connection between all of us as we move into this next experience together. Okay. And if you'd like to place one or two words into chat of intention for the exploration, feel free to do that. And right now, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen and just introduce our intention for this session. So I have just a couple of slides as a visual because I thought it might be a little easier for people. So the first thing I want to do is talk just briefly about our intentions or just point them out. So we have 4. One is to provide a very brief introduction to a form of dialogue that was inspired by a man named David Bohm. Another is to actually offer you a little bit of a live demo of this particular form of dialogue, in hopes of making it a bit more visible. People often ask us, what does this look like? What is this that you're talking about? And then also to invite you to practice 2 key yet often underdeveloped skills for dialogue, which I wrote a bit about in the description, and I'll speak to briefly in a few minutes. And then to also engage with us in a collective reflection on what you witnessed in the dialogue as we were in conversation with each other, and also within yourself. That's part of what you're also going to be witnessing. Okay. So, a little bit of an introduction to dialogue itself. Okay. Amanda put this in the last piece that she sent out about this session, this quote from David Bohm. And Amanda, if you want to spotlight me right now, you can do that. It's really up to you. And then we'll add the rest of the folks in a couple of minutes. So this quote that Amanda shared was, "Thought creates reality." And then it says, "I didn't do that," or "I didn't do it." Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means, because it does in a way sum up this particular kind of dialogue. So David Bohm was actually a renowned quantum physicist. And it was out of his work with physics in the quantum field, and also his relationship with a man named Krishnamurti, that he really became fascinated with human consciousness and how we as humans, perceive our world, collect data, and how we make meaning of what's going on. And, that's what he said was the challenge for us comes in the separation that we create between the narratives that we're creating and the meaning that we're making of our experiences and how what we're saying about how the world works. And then this separation that says, well, but if I don't like how things are, you know, I don't have anything to do with that, right? So there's a separation that exists between the way we make meaning and the stories and narratives that we hold and the results that we get and our willingness to connect them together. Okay, so what can come out of that is that we can get pretty stuck, right? Because it makes it hard for us to really see some of the causal levels of challenges that we have. And so what David Bohm basically proposed was that there's transformation happens through a process, through what he called proprioception, and that dialogue was a practice for revealing and exploring our meaning and the way we create meaning and the meaning that we actually create. So what proprioception means, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is it's actually a biological term, a physiological term. And what it means is knowing what's going on without actually having to see it directly. So if I take my hand and I put it behind me and I move my fingers around, I don't see my fingers moving, but I know they're moving. That's because I have physiological proprioception, right? So what David Bohm was saying was, if we could develop that kind of awareness of ourselves in the process of making meaning, then we could close that gap between making meaning and saying, I did that or I didn't do that. You know how often in organizations we say, the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing. That's a statement about not being proprioceptive in terms of the organizational awareness itself. So that's what dialogue is about from David Bohm's perspective. It's about us being able to be in conversation with each other with the intention of actually revealing and exploring the way that we're making meaning with each other. So the practices that help us to do that, one is to witness without judgment, to learn how to observe without judgment, to listen with authentic curiosity and a desire to learn, especially when we don't agree with what we hear, to inquire and to listen to ourselves as we're thinking, as we're having responses to what's going on, to each other as we're talking, and also to the collective or the system, the whole, right? Seeing how meaning is moving within the organization, within the group. One of the reasons we speak to the center is because we recognize that collective wisdom is really about gathering perspectives from everybody, not just about our single point of view. So questions that arise in response to what somebody else says, we don't necessarily ask them directly to that person. We may ask them into the center because we recognize that the question is really for everyone, with some few exceptions. Inviting and honoring silence, right? So you think about the silence between the notes in music is actually what reveals the melody. And in some sense, as we entertain silence, we also invite the emergence of our ability to see what's going on, of new possibilities, new music, and new forms. So Karen talked about pausing. You know, pausing is one way of slowing down and honoring that silence as well. So, all right, that's enough. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop sharing. And Amanda, would you kind of put everybody into the spotlight, everybody now? And I'm inviting other people in who are going to be with us. And I'd like for you in chat, I want to let you know, I've put a document into chat, and it actually is a roadmap of what's going to kind of what has happened, but particularly what's going to be happening now. So if you want to have that present during the conversation, you can double click on it and pull it down, open it up on your computer. So I'm going to invite you to do that if you'd like right now. Because one of the things I'm going to ask you to do as you're practicing as part of this experience, I'm going to ask you to close chat so that you're not actually putting anything in chat, communicating with somebody else during chat. I want you to be really completely focused on what you're witnessing and what's happening inside you without being in communication with other people for the witnessing part of this. And I know that may seem like an unusual request, but I think you'll find it interesting to experience what happens with that. Okay. So you've got your
Glenna, the document isn't in chat yet. It didn't show up in chat.
Okay, let me hit it again. There we go. Larry put it in too, I think, or maybe he did. Oh, that's kind of, oh, hold on just a second. When I put the document in, I think Larry had communicated with me.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, so it actually didn't, it just went to him. Okay, hold on just a second. I need to re-put it in here for all of us. Okay, now it should go to everybody. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
I didn't catch that my chat had changed. Okay, all right. So let me give you just another few seconds to download that if you want to. No pressure to do that, but if you
Glenna,
wanted it, I figured could have
just
it.
one thing, Glenna, your audio is coming in and out a little bit. I don't know if you can change your microphone.
Yes, I can. I can put on. How's that, Amanda?
Better. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Okay. All right. So everybody got the document that wants it? I hope so. All right. So if you would go ahead now and close chat. I'm going to close mine as well so it doesn't distract me either. So I just want to invite each one of the people that are with me to say hello. We're a group of people that has been practicing dialogue for a while together. And we have some diversity in our group. So I want to just invite them to say hi very briefly. And they're going to share their name and where they are in the world. And then if they want to say just a couple of words about roles that they've played, places that they've worked, they're going to do that, but they're not going to take more than about 20 seconds each or 30 seconds max to do that. Just to give you a little feel so you can also hear their voices. So Larry, can I get you to start?
You can quite easily. My name is Larry Ledgerwood. I am physically located outside of San Francisco, California, so in the US. And these days make my living mostly from coaching work, but I'm involved with a group that's putting together a leadership development company that's targeted specifically for impact organizations. That's sort of my current love and passion.
Thank you. Boaz.
Hi, everybody. I'm Boaz Soifer. I'm currently sitting in Tucson, Arizona, and I've been in the renewable energy industry for about 25 years. Started up a couple of companies, and for the last 15 years or so have been an executive of a couple of global companies focused in distribution. And I've been super interested in organizational development for the last 15 years or so, and working with Glenna and learning about dialogue for the last couple of years.
Great. Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Fidel, and I am currently in Madison, Wisconsin, in the United States. And I am working as an organizational effectiveness consultant within the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So providing strategy development and organizational development work for academic and administrative units within the university, and really trying to integrate dialogue and dialogic principles into the consulting work I do for the university. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thomas.
Yes, hello. My name is Thomas Hoffmann. I'm living in Munich, Bavaria. And I've been working for more than 20 years for publishing houses in every function you can imagine. And actually, I'm consulting publishing houses and authors. And I'm involved in dialogue since 4 years. And I think it's a very magic and powerful, not only instrument, it's a manner of living. And I think it can also strengthen the female qualities in the industry.
Thank you, Thomas. Amanda.
I don't have any titles, and I honestly, nothing comes up to me. I guess I'm just following my curiosity wherever I go and creating spaces for learning the things that I want to learn. And this conference was one of these things I created. Thank you.
Thank you, Prashant.
Hey everyone, nice to be here. My name is Prashant Goel. I am in Asheville, North Carolina. And I would say my work is kind of characterized by ongoing steady inquiry into what supports the co-creation of healthy systems and cultures. Yeah, and looking forward to being in dialogue with my friends here.
Wonderful. Hi, I'm Glenna, Glenna Gerard, and I'm sitting in my office on land in New Mexico in the United States. I have spent the last 30 plus years really developing and engaged with dialogue. It is my passion, and particularly dialogue, which I call Bohm-inspired dialogue, that is about becoming aware of how we make meaning so that we actually can make conscious choices. So it's a particular form of dialogue with a particular purpose. And very strong relationships also get created in that work. And most important for me is that we become conscious as human beings of our stories and our ability to shift them. And I think now at this point in my life, a large part of my energy is devoted to supporting others in the work that is so important out in the world. And reimagining the future of work is a part of that. I have loved being of support to Amanda, and I am so grateful for all of you that are at this conference, and particularly for the younger generations. So thank you. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to sit in silence for a couple of minutes. But before that, I want to remind you, those of you who are witnessing and observing as we're in dialogue for the next probably 35 or 40 minutes, you're important. You're really important to the dialogue because you're actually holding all of us. And your witnessing creates a space for us to be able to listen to ourselves and to each other. And it supports the dialogue. And there are a couple of skills that we're inviting you to be practicing. And one is that witnessing, that observing without judgment. And it's really fundamental, actually, to dialogue. David Bohm used to say, observed thought changes. He said, that's all you have to do. You have to really be willing to observe your thought, your narrative, and it will actually shift. Means you create the opening for something else to happen. So practicing that witnessing what's happening inside yourself, what judgments show up, how does it affect your listening? How do you activate your curiosity? Did you get distracted? How do you return from that? What questions are arising? What that you might want to make a note of. In fact, I think we invited you to bring a paper and a pencil to just write down things that you're witnessing within yourself, things that you're witnessing in terms of the dialogue as you're listening to us, as you're observing and witnessing us being in the dialogue. What are you seeing? Okay, and make a note of that. And then also this saying yes to exploring with authentic curiosity and listening, right? Particularly when judgment jumps in, as it does, all the time. Notice what kind of assumptions you're having about what's been said. You don't have the ability right now to check them out, but you can notice them. And that's a practice that's really important to being able to help groups to reveal how they're thinking about something and what kind of meaning they're making. So you might also just want to write down what you're noticing as you practicing your curiosity and the questions that are showing up. Okay, so enough said about that. We're going to start with a couple minutes of silence. I invite you, of course, into the silence as well, and into just a regrounding and bringing yourself fully present. I'm going to put our question, I was going to say I'm going to put it into chat, but I'm not. So I'm going to trust all of you too. You've got it in your documents, but my partner's here. The question that showed up for me as I was listening today and including listening last week was, what is emerging as needed to support people in reimagining the present and future narratives of work and life and health, right? What supports us and how do we support others in reimagining present and future narratives? Because I think that's the work that we're about. And that's our beginning question, and it may take us, we may go someplace else, depending upon what we hear when we listen and depending on our curiosity. But that's where we'll start. What's emerging as needed to support people in reimagining the present and future narratives? Okay, a few minutes of silence. Okay, so the dialogue is open for whoever feels moved.
I'm finding myself swirling, and I've got this I don't know that it's really a polarity going on, but holding dialogic processes as mechanistic on the one hand, and I've always held it as sort of spiritual on the other hand. And so like now I'm going back and forth, back and forth. And the sort of central thread of that started last week with this notion of not talking about the future of work or reimagining the future of work, but bringing it into the present. Like that was a little piece of conversation last week, and it had me really spinning about, right, the only thing we can really do is what we're going to do right now. and then for me, as I listened to Karen talk, I started shifting, like where I was holding this dialogue, meaning making, and saying, is using dialogic process as a conversational tool, does it create room and safety for a male, or the masculine, so not necessarily male, but the masculine, to the person that finds themselves in that place to actually offer up something different. And by that, I mean, if I offer up what I'm thinking to the center, is it a way to have sort of non-attachment? So this idea, and I don't like hold it anymore. So people's reaction to it isn't a reaction to me, it's to the idea. And so I was just playing with this whole like thing about, is the structure itself a way for us to create safe space for people to explore, and then watch the reaction to the meaning making, if you will, the idea float around from a little bit of a distance that may have them feel safer. And so I'm just like spinning around in that right now. I'm done.
I was just thinking about the question a little bit, and the phrase, what is emergent? And I think in a lot of the work that I've been doing lately, personally, professionally, there's been this interrelationship between emergent and container, right? There's always like, in order for things to be emergent, there's a from which they're emerging. And so it's interesting to me to combine the emergent with the idea of support. Because I think of support as the container for what's emergent, right? And this question positioned them the other way around. And so just thinking about the chicken and egg of container and emergent, and support and creation. And one of the things that's available, that's emergent, I think, is an increasing mindfulness about container building. And I imagine this conference, I haven't attended, but just from the little bit I heard, made me curious if container creation had been a theme. I'll leave it there.
I love that the notions of safety and container and placing something in the center has come up, because when I heard this question, I got agitated because I feel like this is a question, and to put myself in this question from my experience, I really don't know. I don't know. You know, I feel and so as a result of that, you know, the thought of reimagining the nature of work, I feel like I'm so steeped in sort of a culture of work and in engaging in work and work, you know, that in order to kind of get enough distance to step out, I need to be able to, you know, throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. I need that freedom to be wrong and experiment and offer ideas and what I realize is that I need some safety and I need a container in which to do that in, you know, and so this notion of being able to toss something out into a center that is held and I'm not judged, or it's not going to come back on me, or people aren't going to be reactive, feels very freeing, especially because I don't feel confidence, even if it's a false sense of confidence, that I somehow kind of know what's going on or know. I just don't know a lot around this. And it feels very personal in a way. So I don't know. I just wanted to kind of put that out there, that this notion of work, I really need to even explore what that is and what that is in my life, and all the sort of constraints and learnings that I've taken on that maybe I need to shed before I can really gain some perspective on it. So I'll leave it at that for now.
I'm feeling moved to bring in a story of a conversation that I had this morning, early in the morning. And it was a follow-up conversation to one where, and I can't share the exact details because of confidentiality, but I was bringing forward a perspective in the previous conversation about something I thought needed to be included in a document before it could be ratified by a board that I'm sitting on. And it was interesting, there were other members on the board who had been part of creating the document. So a little bit of a, you know, kind of potential conflict of interest in a way. But I was bringing in something around power and awareness around power, and it didn't get resolved at all. So we had another conversation this morning, and when I was speaking to why I thought it was important that it be included before this document could be ratified, I had the distinct feeling that there was at least one, maybe two people there who were not, they were looking for a way to get it ratified without really, what I felt was they weren't actually listening that well to what I was saying. And so somebody who was facilitating said, "I wonder if you feel heard." And I said, well, I feel like this person, somebody else there, I feel that they're hearing my words, but I don't think they understand what I'm saying at all. And and later I was reflecting on that, and I thought, that's interesting, that distinction. You know, what does it take to really feel heard? And I realized that for me in that situation, it didn't mean that I needed the person to agree with me, but I did need for them to really understand where I was coming from. And it was they were interpreting my words around power very differently than how I meant them. Mm-hmm. So I'm asking myself, actually, is one of the things that's needed in terms of that container and the safety, the sense that there's a real intention to understand, not necessarily agree with what another person is saying, but to really attempt to walk beside them, look at what they're looking at, which is not the same as what I might be looking at. Is that a part of it? You know, it certainly was a part of it for me this morning in terms of feeling like I was really being listened to. You know, there's that, are you listening? Okay, but are you hearing? What are you hearing? What are you understanding? Just the levels. What do people need in order to feel heard, not agreed with, but heard? Yeah, so I wanted to share that. Thank you.
Building on Glenna's talk about power, when I'm facilitating processes in management teams, I very often use a talking piece. And I guess many of you will do that also, but sometimes.
Soren, I apologize. Well, I'm sad to interrupt you. Part of the process right now is for us to be in dialogue and for everybody else to be holding that and witnessing. So maybe you didn't hear, maybe you weren't here for the very beginning instructions, but at this point, everybody else is not invited to participate in the conversation. Okay. You are invited though to witness like exactly what is coming up for you, like what is coming up around the talking stick, and make a note of it and just, you know, perhaps bring it in later. So
sorry for my misunderstanding.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm sorry that I had to, you know, kind of stop you in the middle. Thank you very much for understanding. Okay.
I'm appreciating, Glenna, you giving language to this distinction between maybe hearing the words that are spoken and then the actuality of some kind of lived experience of understanding of what the other person was attempting to convey. And I wonder how that plays out, like in our lived experience amongst us as a group of 7 in dialogue, but also the whole group here. Like, so if I look at a couple of things that were shared earlier, like I loved a lot of what was presented by Andreas and Valentina and Karen. And so if I look at the slide, for example, that Andreas and Valentina presented about moving from like a paradigm of organizations as mechanistic to organizations as psychological to organizations as living systems or social systems. And I look at what Karen shared about, you know, just like the nature of what she's calling FemQ, the invitation to embody more feminine qualities in our, you know, in our organizational work. Like one of the things that happened in that space, for example, was when Amanda translated what Karen said into a specific subjective experience that she had that was in relation to what Karen was sharing about, in a moment where there was a dynamic where we could at least inquire, we can't say for sure, but we could at least be curious about whether FemQ was being suppressed in that moment. You know, like by societal forces, by organizational forces, by individual forces, a lot of different influences could be brought to bear that we could potentially inspect. But so then I wonder, like, if I think about like Soren right now, he didn't understand the guidelines that were presented, and it was like no big deal. We're like, okay, Soren, no, thank you, but we're gonna focus on the planned exercise. It could be that somebody has the thought that, oh, that shouldn't be happening. That's exactly where proprioception of thought becomes relevant. That's where we have a lived experience of proprioception of thought, because we can say, oh, that's thought coming up in presenting as reality. But you could have a whole other range of thoughts in relation to Soren. And most of us, at least in this group, did. We're like, oh, that's okay, no big deal. That just happened. And so, like, how do we translate something that is so alchemical, proprioception of thought, into lived experience such that it's not just words and it is understood, And so I'm just like tying together a few themes, this distinction between listening and understanding, the distinction with like what proprioception of thought actually is, and how do we translate it into our subjective experience at the way that Amanda did in her, in her translation of what Karen was sharing. And so, like, I would be asking the question for us, like, what words sparked your curiosity in what has been presented all day? What has felt known to you? And where might it actually go deeper? Where something might not have been understood that you thought you understood? Like, where are you willing to stay engaged in curiosity? So that's some of what's coming up for me right now.
I feel called to speak. I'm not sure exactly where I'm going. But I'll share my thought process of what just happened. So Soren showed up, and I noticed a desire to actually include him in our circle and have him spotlighted as well. And I wonder, like, I'm not suggesting that now, but it's just like, I think that in those moments where something goes wrong is where discoveries are made, like, oh, we thought this was about us as a group, but oh, what if it's not? What if, when these big discoveries of science, they are made by accident, right? And I think including everything, in improv as well, you always say yes to whatever is happening. And so that was my thought process. And what I wanted to offer to the center now is connected with the word I used, which is desire. And for me, the word imagination and the word desire are very connected. I can only desire what I can imagine. And the limits of my imagination are the limits of my desire. And my desire to be heard and speak in the meetings with my boss, which at that time I was totally disconnected with my own desires. But I think now I can look in retrospect and say, wow, I actually desired to lead the meeting and share what I was working on. And because it was my project, it was a project that I was developing. And my boss would, I don't know, I don't know what exactly was his thought process, but I think he just didn't know other way. So I guess I'm offering the question, what do our desires about work and in our relationships at work, what do they tell us about the future of work? Are we aware of that even? And also in that picture of the reorganization and what it looks like, you know, when you have the all these colorful arrows pointing to relationships that are happening in the system, but they are hidden. So someone has an affair with someone or da da da. What if our desires were visible? Or what if, I don't know. Okay, yeah. I think one more thing. It's the role of mothers in organizations. And you know, the maternity leave and I learned recently that maternity leave was something actually recent in history of organizations. It was not a common thing to have someone go and be paid for those months. And you know, the desire of a mother to take care of her child and still get paid from the system, you know. So this is an example maybe of what I'm pointing to. Yeah, I'll offer that to the center.
I had all the time now the impression I must bring in something. I'm not sure whether the questions should be answered, but why not? I think Karen, in a way, answered your question, Lena. How could we support people or women or whatever in rematching present or future narratives? I think she gave, in a way, an answer, because I had the feeling that her work with women and of course with male persons is kind of organization explicitly, yeah, the narratives. And I think it's a very practical way of doing it. And I have another perhaps perspective to help people rematching the narratives either of presence or of future. Isn't it a very nice possibility to just listen, to help them to find the roots of the current narratives and listen them, where are their roots? And perhaps at some point of the way asking them, oh, that's fine, and could there be another way, or could be another, not a narrative, if you ask someone, could there be another narratives? Of course, this is ridiculous, but you perhaps could ask, the story you told me that makes perhaps your narrative, how can you imagine that this story or this point is told in another way, in another way, in a more, for example, comfortable way, or in a more future viewing way? That's my question.
The word shame is coming up. Still thinking about those arrows. And how much time or energy do we waste not sharing what we're thinking because we are ashamed of what we're thinking? Maybe I'm gonna say in the first person, how much time and energy do I waste not sharing my thoughts because I'm ashamed? And then what is the cost for the system to have me hold back the truth, a truth that is there, and I'm ashamed. So, and nonetheless, everyone can see that there's shame. Shame is like this thing where there is no hiding. So it's interesting. I would be curious to investigate shame in organizations and how it shows up and why.
That reminds me that, so you're referring maybe to the thoughts you know you're having that you don't share. Then there's a whole set of thoughts that I'm discovering, I'm assuming others have this experience too, that we don't want to admit to ourselves that we're even having, right? And I've just started in the last couple of days to try to make a more intentional practice of noticing those thoughts. And just like the emergence of Soren earlier, seeming maybe like a creative inspiration, those thoughts that even we are hiding from, I think often are a source of wisdom or understanding or creativity or whatever. So there's that like that internal shame is limiting, let alone the shame we fear experiencing from others, right?
Yeah. You know, I think it's one of the things that makes it so hard for us to actually see what we're up to. I mean, individually sometimes because we're afraid or we're shamed or I'm judging myself, right? About, did I do that wrong? Like, what are people thinking now about my intervention with Soren? So all those things are showing up for all of us, I think. This is an assumption I hold all the time. Our judgments, internal and external, and of course, so fear holds us from just looking and seeing what's present. And then making choices about what if we did it differently. I think it's hard for us to even see what is so. Yeah.
I'm appreciating Amanda calling back that one org chart that then had all the arrows and stuff. And then I remember Andreas even commented how like a lot of people smiled in response because it seemed to, in other words, like it struck a chord of resonance with a number of people who were witnessing the presentation. And it seems to illustrate a distinction between like this ordered wishful thinking that we can put on a slide versus like an actual reality of what's happening. And the wishful thinking, maybe even coming from like a genuine place in us, but somehow in denial of what's actually happening, And in a way, also, it's like the thoughts that Boaz is mentioning, like the ones that we don't even want to, like we pretend they're not even there. In a way, that's also like a denial of, like a sort of like a deeper, more inclusive reality. And so I wonder, like I came across a news, and I actually even had to go to an alternative news source to see this article today, but it was about like a record number of crossings of migrants to the UK yesterday. And I was thinking about this, and I was just like, I'm thinking about how, I just saw an article about this on LinkedIn, how, like migrations are going to go way up during climate change, et cetera. And it's like, usually under our like ordered versions of reality, there are like borders and they are restrictive and we keep things out and, like that's the reality. But it's like, what if every one of those migrants was a weak signal from our global system saying, actually, there's a different way we might conceive this that is, like a fundamentally different understanding of reality, and that aligns with a different set of principles than the ones that our society are based on. It's like, how often do we fall in that trap in different contexts all over the place, within ourselves, within our organizations, within our societies, of creating these like structured, clear, wishful thinking oriented depictions of reality that are actually just denying a ton of factors that are present.
So I'm going to call our dialogue, just timing wise, because I want to create space for those of you who have been graciously and generously holding the space with us, witnessing, noticing what's going on for yourself, listening, and being curious. So I want to thank all my partners, and in this conversation. And, our intention in doing this was, was hope, and asking you to witness was hopefully just creating a taste of a particular form of dialogue that's seeking to make visible how we make meaning. And it was, of course, very short. And so I'd like to just open the space for people to reflect on, what did you notice, about what was going on for you as you were witnessing? What did you notice in our conversation, our dialogue? And, about the process, about how we were talking with each other. What thoughts do you have? What reflections do you have? And Amanda, I'm assuming you'd probably like about, 5 minutes or something at the end to talk about tomorrow. So we might have about a little less than 15 minutes. So please just, jump in or raise your hand if you want, and we can kind of take different comments. And also, please, if you want to open up the chat and use the chat to also add comments and things, please do that. So, Juliana, did you wave your hand to say something? Okay.
Yeah, I want to share something. First thing within me, I realized that in my essence, I'm very childlike or immature in terms of dialogues. And just wanted to jump in and say a lot of things that I find it fun, or I think I want to validate what the person's saying. So this is one thing that I noticed. And then now thinking as well, like I worked also in the UK work environment, in the office. And I realized back in the time, the difference between the cultures as well, and how we communicate and have dialogues. So I don't know if Amanda can validate this, but we are much more like, we interrupt each other a lot. So you don't let anyone finish their sentences. We understood already what is going on. So we jump into conclusions, or we just get them out of the big message, and that's it. So the nuances and the space for the individual to conclude their thoughts and all of this is not, it doesn't happen much often. So yeah, and I felt very insecure for a lot of a long time, and I experienced also what Amanda experienced in terms of people having to talk in my behalf, because of, I think, that perception that I don't think I know how to have a proper dialogue, like the very polite and sophisticated way to have a conversation. So I think this is still in my heart. So even now I'm like, or forgetting to talk. I think it is because of that. It's still like this strong anxiety and in speaking to groups. So yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing. And I just want to appreciate what you shared and offer you an invitation to delete your judgment of how you were responding. Thanks. What else? Yeah.
The connection that I kept making, because I am always asking why. And so why do we make judgments? And it went back for me to safety. It feels safe to be in an opinion in one place. It feels unsafe to have to move out of something that you're comfortable with. And so you can go all the way back to Maslow's hierarchy, but how do we create that safe space within an organization, within a community, for people to feel comfortable to move out of where they are into something new that in fact might be better, but feels scary.
Thank you, Laura. Ilse, did you have your hand up also?
Yes, thank you. I noticed, as attempted that I feel to answer your question of the former lady, that was not the purpose. So I'm not going to do that. Would love to talk to you on another occasion about that. But I also noticed something beautifully happening between you. That's how you appreciate each other's words. And I'm familiar with art circling work, and we do that over there as well. So there is the giving each other permission to really speak up and be quiet when somebody else is talking, which is something most people aren't used to. That's one thing. The silences that you respect as well. And then there's the active appreciation shown for what you have overheard other people say. And then the last thing I noticed is some people use a lot of body language, others do not. And that also creates a very different atmosphere and yeah, makes it very personal, I think. So those were a couple of things I've written down, but I want to give the others the opportunity to speak as well. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Yes, Aline?
Lily.
Aline, thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if I know what I wanted to share, but I felt like talking because I felt really touched by everything that was going on in a deep level. And I noticed that I was not only present with my mind, but especially with my heart. So my body, like the body wisdom was very present when I was witnessing. And I don't know, I felt like goosebumps, and then I started crying just listening to you. Well, I'm back. And then I felt like crying. I don't know, some content, some part of the content touched me very deeply. And I could feel like the safe space to do that in front of the camera and then open the mic and just talk about that. So just wanted to share and appreciate the work that just happened. It was a pleasure to witness that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mm. Other comments, questions, reflections? And questions can be just a question that has come up for you that you're holding. Doesn't mean anybody's going to have an answer to it. Yes.
I think Aaron has his hand up.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, Aaron, not sure where you are. Go ahead.
Here in Detroit. Thanks for all the dialoguers and everybody holding the space. I was really struck at the moment when Amanda talked about desire in the workplace, and that is like definitely something I'll take away. I loved how it sort of, maybe the framing of the question, I think, was sort of like about, it felt cognitive to me, like thinking into the future of work. And that felt like a real synthesis between the previous speaker in terms of like feminine intelligence and this notion of like, what if we are inbuilt with desires that are in alignment with life and natural process, and yet we've learned to live in a system that shames us for having those desires. And so of course that's embedded in our culture. And what would it mean to make it a praxis of relating to desire as information and wisdom for orienting towards wholeness in work? And I just think that's such a beautiful question, and it stirred up a lot for me, and wanted to mark that. So thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I can speak also quickly, weaving in what has been shared. Thank you, Ju, for being here. It's yeah, I think the Brazilians know what we mean when we see the cultural differences, and it's real. So I just wanted to validate, yes, there is a lot of cultural differences, and it's part of also it's part of our mini making systems also, like in each culture, there's a different system, which is very, very interesting if we start looking deeply into that. Yeah, and I noticed a desire like to, when Sense Lab was presenting, I noticed a desire for them to show the Brazilian cases, because I do think there's something so powerful in bridging different, in that case, indigenous communities, because they are the ones that taught us dialogue, right? The circle practice, and it's just something so basic and natural that we are having to like, oh, learn again. Oh, we sit in circle and we speak. It's so simple, yet we tend to make it so yeah, sophisticated sometimes, and it's actually very simple. So yeah, thank you everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, Amanda. Just a reminder that there are so many different doorways, in and needed, because there are so many different cultures and ways of being. And what may have been really simple at one time, I don't know if any of you ever read a book called The Mutant Message. And the woman is going walkabout in Australia, supposedly, and she asks the Aborigine that she's with, what's going on? You seem to like read, kind of like know what each other's thinking. How could I learn how to do that? Something like that. And they said, you can't, because you learn how to lie and edit, so early. You hide things, from yourself and from each other. And if you didn't do that, then you would just be able to, speak telepathically with each other, but you have too many barriers inside. So we just all have patterns, right? And so we have to find our way in. to what may at one time have been very simple. So, yeah. Amanda, can I hand it back over to you just to set up your next thing? And just thank you, all of you, for the way you participated and held and witnessed and made this whole experience something precious. So thank you.
Thank you. I see Kel say with her hands in her heart. So I'm gonna do the same and just appreciate everyone. Soren, thank you for your interruption earlier. That made us think a lot. And for next week, we have 3 cases, and Sherry and Sophie will be hosting next week. So I actually want to see if Sherry wants to say anything to prepare us for next week. Sherry?
Not anything specific right now, but I'm excited to, close it out with 3 other cases, and we're gonna have a really cool group synthesis that's gonna be a little bit different than dialogue. Actually, it'll be more artsy and creative. So yeah, hope you all join.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presence and your attention, which is the biggest gift we can give ourselves in the attention economy. And if you have any questions or comments or feedback, we are welcoming them always. You can send me an email. I think everyone has my email. So I'm really welcoming feedback, and just in terms of what you're learning and what's making sense or not. And also we do have a donations link if you feel called to contribute to this organism that is creating itself. I don't know what we will do with the money. Let me be transparent. We are receiving donations, and I think I'm actually gonna set up a dialogue so we can, for anyone who's interested, to see what's possible with that money. What can we imagine? And see where we go with that. That's it. I don't know if I can share the link. Maybe this one. I don't know if you have shared the link. Oh, thanks. Okay, that's all. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
See you
you.
next week. Bye-bye.
Good night. Thank you all.